up, everybody? This is Karak with ACG. Side games, especially those in a different genre, are not a sure bet in the future. Perhaps quantum bit computers are going to be able to allow us to guess the chance of success of a mainline sequel set up in a different genre completely. But currently figuring the odds of that out is like guessing if grabbing the dice after rolling craps and putting them in your hand in a certain way is going to give you a higher chance of success. This is a gambit that dudes named Lenny have been betting on since Vegas grew its first neon erections out of the desert, and anybody betting on that is in the long term usually missing at least a couple fingers because it's never guaranteed. However, put a little bit more time and a little bit more money into it, and maybe your chances go up a bit. Dragon Quest has done it, Zelda's done it, and now Persona joins the fray of games that have mixed with Dynasty Warriors smash everything gameplay styles of third-person action slasher games and taken their own fiction and mixed them in. Persona Strikers is out later this week for $59.99 for the Switch, the PC, and the PS4. Let's jump into it. If you like these videos, I would love for you to spread the word, subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up if you like it, subscribe if you don't. Let's do this. Graphically, Persona Strikers looks awesome. Until it doesn't. It's not like Persona was going into this battle with a Matador Persona versus a Magician and ignoring the fact that every single Persona in the last 10 years in these games looks like they skipped leg day. Persona positively exudes the one thing that I feel those other two titles that have tried to mix up with Dynasty Warriors may have not necessarily brought forth, and that's art design. It's hard not to see Persona as a personal wonderland for the artist. Each game a layered cake of batshit insane designs where your boss just comes in, gives you some crayons and says, hey man, see you in 4 days, make some cool shit. It's not like things are normal. And Persona, in the first 50 seconds in the cutscene, you get attacked by a helicopter with a giant face on it carrying a holographic Gatling gun. And then just when you think, yeah, I sort of got a lid on this, you end up falling asleep and waking up to talk to a haunted schoolgirl welcoming you to a place called the Velvet Room. Now, while the Personas are from Persona 5, as are the characters themselves, this doesn't stop you from noticing just how well done the entire art aesthetic is in this game. Mix that in with the street graffiti UX design, and you have Persona Strikers. I just wish the worlds themselves were more interesting that you walked around in, because if Persona takes some critical elemental damage in its battle for your gaming dollar, it's the fact that even lacing weird designs on the gameplay worlds, they are still basic boxes with a couple items thrown down to make you move around them a little bit slower. From the ice dungeon to the starting Castle of Hearts theme to the others, the locations never even really come close to matching the game's other instances of excellent art. And this is also copied when it comes to the overworld. Regardless of where you are and in what parts of the city or even in the game world itself, it just never does hit necessarily home. And that actually feels even more so because of the way the game breaks up the different cutscenes and the different locations you go with the combat. It feels a little bit off balance. When you get into combat, it brings design and execution of contextual power into a razor sharp focus. And that helps that as you're moving around, that animation and the delineated expertise, that unique character work elevates Dynasty Warriors gameplay and style into this graphical presentation and makes it visually so interesting, it's hard to actually look away, which is good, because if you did, you'd most likely die. In fact, if you don't look away, you'll most likely die, because the game has issues overlaying so much information in each frame. It's like they saw Persona 5 and thought to themselves, let's do twice that, but all at once. And it's one of the first games I've played in a long time where I can say this is visually a little bit too busy for what it's trying to do. Nevertheless, every time you die, every time you move around the game world, the animation and the overall character design just works to make you feel like you're in something that is unique, even when you look at Dynasty Warriors and the multiple times they've tried to mix various different fictions. Now, the Switch runs at 30 FPS. It's pretty damned rough, though, and the PC on the 2080 Ti was getting mostly 60 FPS at 4K with all the settings on max, and I say mostly because one or two dungeons have particular effects that can eat your FPS up, and combine that with huge battles with 50 plus enemies all spitting out over the top effects, lay special attacks at you, and that's before you face off against some mini boss that does the same, and seeing FPS drops is not uncommon. One thing to remember, this does have a resolution factor set. You can go all the way down to 0.2 of your overall resolution all the way up to 2. So if you need some FPS, that's one of the first places you'll probably want to look. Another thing is Persona Strikers is both beautiful and at times a aliased catastrophe, even on 4K settings. The characters in the cutscenes look rough around the edges, and while 4K does elevate most of that, it is still noticeable, especially when it looks like a lot of the characters are sort of just cut out of 2D flat screens and slapped into the game with those aliased edges. That being said, Strikers has it going on for the most part where it actually matters. When someone's anime sword smashes or slashes or slices or slits through the scales of some whacked out, hopped up on nightmare juice squeezed from Human Desire's bad guy, it is hard not to look at that and go, damn, that is sweet looking. Also, you'll probably be going, damn, what am I looking at? But another thing in these 3D kind of games, the things that matter are audio. And when we're looking at the sound, I would say this isn't bad, especially when you have a consistent battle sounds versus the momentary pauses that you would see in a turn-based battle version of the game like Persona. So it can get a little bit numbing on the ears, especially after every attack, where most of the weapons sound somewhat like the same sword clang was used and they just ran it through some kind of variation editor. It works though. Now, due to the incredible amount of action on the screen, utilizing 3D effects to inform you that an out-of-screen activity is going to happen rarely occurs, and usually you just find out when some pissed-off 6-color horse desaturates your body by kicking it into oblivion. Speaking of Oblivion, that had good music. Does this? I don't even know why I brought up Oblivion. Oh yeah, because I just played Oblivion. So music. This has some reworkings of the prior titles. It also has a couple that seemed new to me. I dare say that the repetitive nature of the game's main themes during exploration does get a bit grating. This also occurred sometimes in Persona 5. It's awesome that the music is this good, but it's a little bit like the artists know it's good as well, and they come up to you and they're like, hey man, have you heard this song? And you're like, dude, I'm listening to it right now on the speakers in front of me. How do you not know that? A lot of people who haven't played a Persona game don't understand the cutscenes and the voice, so let's talk about that.
Let's go! Showtime! Spike horn! Here! Right?
I think you mean AI, not NI.
Right. It stands for Artificial Intelligence. It can search all kinds of databases, conduct navigation, manage your schedule, even talk out logic problems and stuff with you. The makers go on about how you can ask it anything and you'll get the best possible answer.
I remember seeing a demo of one on TV. For example, I've learned how to selectively breed certain vegetables.
The cast returns from Persona 5, and that is excellent because overall, some of the typical tropism does appear in these kind of characters, but I have no issues with that. Just be aware, some of the cutscenes, damn long, longer than almost entire levels in some other games, it feels like. One of the problems here, it's noticed right away, is the mixing, the layering, the mastering. When it comes down to the voices and the music during the action scenes, especially during cutscenes, it can be impossible to hear some of the characters talking. This isn't a small thing. This is 5 to 15 decibels quieter with some characters than other, and a weird kind of almost recording effect that's actually occurred here. This is noticeable from the very first day to the very ending. It is instantly noticeable, distracting, and you will probably have to go in and adjust those levels to make sure you can hear everybody. That is highly disappointing. I'm not 100% sure how many people notice that, because when we say the word disappointing, a lot of times I think a Dynasty Warriors game. I'm not going to smash on them, but they're not necessarily the deepest of games when it comes to their combat systems, which is going to slide us right into gameplay. Now, these titles are notorious for their gameplay, notable for their fandom and neglected by the mainstream as shallow copycats that have sort of created a blender-like mentality to genre, spitting out mixed drinks versions of games that never equal the sum of their ingredients. Not all of them, at least. For example, Hyrule Warriors, which mixed in Zelda, did very well, as did the Dragon Quest game mixes. So at least we have a very strong fiction pushing it. And when it comes to the story, Persona is a sequel to Persona 5, not Persona Royale, though Royale is considered the de facto title by a lot of people and was the last to release. It's all a bit confusing, but just remember, Persona 5 sequel, yes. Persona Royale, no. It has you jumping in as the Phantom Thieves, stealing people's vices and changing them back into good people. The only way it really works in the real world. That's not counseling. That's fake. Instead, it's basically just beating people up until they squeeze out a diamond filled with their rage and bad energy. And to do that, you got to travel through some dungeons. Now, these are locations that reflect the vice and badness of the bad guys themselves. Each dungeon you take on has enemies that get harder and harder as you progress, and while you can sneak up and ambush them as well as sneak past them completely, but you got to watch out a little bit, because if you're not paying attention, they can do the same thing to you, resulting in one or the other getting stunned and starting the fight at a pretty sizable disadvantage. And fight you will, because this game may be Persona in style and story, but it's Dynasty Warriors, at least in most of its gameplay, with you running around small locations that are battle arenas, taking out the enemies with weak and powerful attacks and building up various meters to pull off specials. Now, unlike a lot of these kind of games, the enemies aren't just all together around the game world and you're not interacting with them instantly. Instead, you see one spirit and then you hit it, or it hits you, and then you find out who they are inside of the spirit, and a battle arena sort of gets created. Here's the thing though, if you haven't played Persona 5, this is going to be completely confusing to you. The game does nothing to offer any introduction and even decides right right at the start that all the characters are just going to be choosable from the very beginning for your 4-party dungeon delving team right away. And I'm not going to complain. Well, I will complain a little bit about it because it can be rough on newcomers. I didn't mind it though. Another thing that's rough though is the camera. Actually, it's a bit of a nightmare. It's mostly because Persona Strikers is far more interested in fucking looking awesome and secondarily feeling awesome. Luckily, it feels awesome, well, mostly because latency and combos and building up the various different skills is pretty easy. And let's be honest, this is not a super detailed or deep kind of genre overall. Also, while using the Persona summon button, this can help because it pauses the action, and sometimes it lets you see what's going on, because at its fastest, it's sometimes hard to even tell who is hitting you and who you're hitting, or if you're getting hit from the side or the front. And Dynasty Warrior games as a whole have never been super slow or super fast. This game makes them feel glacial. Now, dodging is also handled via the trigger, and it switches into a run as well when you're in combat, or when you're out of it. You can lock onto enemies as well by clicking down on the thumb pad, though I would tell you that you don't necessarily need to use it. And a lot of that is because combat itself is helped tremendously by each of the Phantom Thieves feeling almost religiously different from any others, with weird specials and power-ups and dynamic elements to make the best of their fighting style. And while a couple of them are a bit ho-hum, most have some kind of unique feel to their combat, requiring more thought than other games in the genre. You have the ability to take 4 into battle any one time. When you're ever at a checkpoint, you can switch out those characters. Master Arts are also here. This is you getting a special move and a combo as you continue fighting with particular characters. It's sort of a familiarity combo. One of the biggest issues, and an issue that continues to be a problem for Persona, is how busy this HUD is. It looked okay in the role-playing game. It's eclectic, I like it, but during battle, and especially when the game starts out and it gives you like 15 tutorials in the first 10 minutes, it can be mind-boggling. Luckily, you can see the tutorials later and dive into them and see what makes every character special when it comes to combat, aside from whatever weapon, armor, and side items you've outfitted them with. But be aware that HUD, not necessarily the best in this kind of game. In battle, whenever you need, you can just sort of try to run away. You can also run out of a dungeon and replace your stamina points, which are used during battles, and allow for you to continue moving forward. Basically, returning to any checkpoint in the dungeon you have activated allows for you to go back to the van or back to your home, recharge, and return. Also, while ambushes and so forth I stated mattered, I did notice that the game has a couple balance issues, with some battles being a great deal harder than others, even in normal locations. Now, in the downtime, sometimes you're doing a story mission or two, which usually revolves around going from one part of a location to another to talk to someone and then returning back. Does it sound boring? Yeah, it is a little bit, especially when you compare it to the RPG, and there's a couple reasons for this. In most locations, there are a couple stores to buy healing items or items and weapons and armor to upgrade your characters. However, these can also be purchased later in the game from one of the characters that joins you in the battle against bad feelings, which is a little bit odd and makes you feel like, why am I exploring these, well, sort of boring locations? Add to that they try to add in a mini game like investigating something that goes on, but investigating really just means running down the same 4 alleys and walking up to somebody and hitting B and having them read some text to you and then being done. This is trying to do something different, and it's keeping some of the trappings from the older games, which actually don't always help it. And sometimes that'll impact your fun factor, other times it won't, and that's what we're going to talk about now. I'm not going to lie, Strikers is a blast. When in the midst of combat, it is incredible, but my God, the game makes Persona 5 feel like speed reading when it comes to its story presentation here. For example, one time the game has you in an almost 10-minute cutscene and then says, let's go and do this thing, only to have you load into a small section of a town that actually won't let you go anywhere without the cat saying, hey yo, better actually go do the mission, which requires you to then leave that location to see another cutscene. Not necessarily unheard of in these titles, but certainly more noticed here. If Persona Strikers was a Persona itself, its name would be bizarre, and it'd just do nothing for big stretches of time and then go batshit insane and kill everyone on the screen. When it comes to fun factor, though, it was quite enjoyable. It's just I wanted to get through the cutscene so I could get back to the actual combat. The overall worlds themselves weren't impressive or super interesting when it came to their graphics or their design, but the combat itself was. And as you guys know, that's what matters. And that brings us to the rating. This game is your normal price, $59.99. It is also very long and has some great combat. If you're a Persona fan, I would say this is worth buying right away. So we'll rate it as a buy when it comes to that. I will say if you are not a Persona fan, this game does not reach out and help you at all. There's no cuddling, no hugging, and no explaining of story like a bunch of kids around a campfire. The game is not worried about that. It leaps straight in, so be prepared. If you're, say, a fan of the other games in these genres, you might want to jump into this and learn a little bit about Persona, but guess what? You, well, really can't learn a bit about Persona in this. You might be interested in how they attack and what they do, but you're probably going to be pretty confused in what else is going on. So I'd say get a primer by maybe watching a video where they break these down. Its strengths are its connection to Persona and the fact that it might be the best of these games at just focusing the original design into the style of the game through its fiction. But its main weakness is that due to how the combat works, it can feel decidedly slow when you do 3 minutes of combat and then 15 minutes of cutscenes. And while Persona 5 had some of those issues, I would say, to me, Persona Strikers feels like it's much more of a consistent offender. So be aware. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, subscribe. I would love for you guys to check out the Patreon. It's an awesome time for gaming. You're going to see some stuff from me in the next couple days as well. There's some pretty cool news coming up this week that I'm going to talk about in the iTunes and Spotify podcast, as well as this Friday in the actual podcast itself, ACG, the best gaming podcast on Twitch. Love to see you in all those places. Peace out. Enjoy the rest of your week. Oh, you can also use my Amazon affiliate links. I'll put those in the description. I don't do sponsors, but you can always buy from Amazon through those, and it helps out the channel. Peace out.